Hi, this is Kim McAllister with Schreiner University, and we're going to be looking at ethics in nursing research. And we have our list of objectives today. So there are ethical issues that can happen with research. Um, there are problems with how research can be set up. Sometimes research in the past has been set up in ways that took advantage of people who were participating in research. Sometimes there were horrible consequences for the participants, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So we need to understand that there are, the risk of obvious harm to people. There are also some issues with research in that people who are conducting the research can develop relationships and even friendships with the participants, and this can impact your bias and your ability to see things clearly. We have to be sure that the informed consent that the participant signs is very clear and explains what data is going to be collected, how it's going to be collected, and how it's going to be used. Also, what's going to be required of the participant. Will they have to come and go? Will they stay for several weeks? Is this something that is a one-time event? What is the commitment that's required by the participant? You also have to let people know what the potential harm could be. Um, if you're conducting an interview as part of your research, you want to openly record your notes so that the person is continually reminded that you are writing down what they're saying and that the conversation that you're engaging in is part of research. Also, when you are a researcher, you want to have a peer group. You want to have other people who are providing some support to you. That helps you to maintain focus. So some of the historical events that have influenced the development of ethical codes and regulations for research are things we're going to look at. If you look at this slide, you'll see a number of events that happen which had a profound impact on research. One of the biggest that most people are very well aware of are that during World War II, the Third Reich, the Nazis, participated in some horrific human uh, so-called research where they did unspeakable things to prisoners of war, of people they thought were no account, such as Jews, also people who politically spoke out against them, people who had some type of genetic defect or other defect. They were experimented on, and we'll go into that in a little more detail. You can also see the Tuskegee syphilis study that began in 32 to 72. And then there were other studies that happened in the 50s and in the 60s. And all of these things came together. And finally, the national outrage was such that there was a national research out in the 70s. And then we ended up having some international um, international committees and proclamations that all impact our research. So the very first ethical research principles that was developed was the Nuremberg Code, and this came after the war crimes were fully disclosed at the end of the war, and people did not want to ever see this happen again. And this Nuremberg Code was actually then used as part of the prosecution. In other words, this is how they were charged for crimes. And so there are a number of provisions, the main ones being that voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Remember, with the Nazis, they used prisoners of war or other people who had absolutely no ability to refuse and also had no control of what happened to them. They were literally prisoners and they were experimented on in horrific ways. And they often died or had terrible deformities afterwards because of it. Also, a lot of the experiments produced no useful evidence whatsoever. And so, because of this, an experiment has to be able to produce something that will benefit society. And it should be conducted to avoid any physical or mental suffering or injury. And you have to look at the degree of risk and make sure that the degree of risk is worth the what the reward would be. And there are other details there that you can look at as well. But the main focus of the Nuremberg Code was to provide informed consent, a risk benefit analysis, and also the right to withdraw without any penalty. Another event that helped fuel all of this was something that happened in the University of Chicago. They decided to film jury deliberations to see how the actions of the attorneys in the case impacted the outcome of the deliberations. And this resulted in the first U.S. regulation on limiting human research. And the other side effect of this is that it made jury deliberations confidential. Another experiment that happened, which kind of blows our mind now, is there was a drug that was given, an experimental drug given to pregnant women in the 1950s called thalidomide, and it was supposed to help treat morning sickness or insomnia. But the women who were given it were not told that it was experimental, and because that wasn't a requirement at that time to conduct research. Unfortunately, thalidomide caused a lot of birth deformities. It caused either the babies were born without limbs or missing part of limbs. And this outrage caused an amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The next one we want to look at is the Declaration of Helsinki. This was an international proclamation, and it said that the interest of the subject in research should always be placed above the interest of society, that anyone participating in human research should get the best possible medical care or treatment. And in addition to the other provisions of the Nuremberg Code, it added that the interest of the subject should be placed above society, and that every subject should get the best known treatment, which is just what I said. There was a situation with the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital where elderly mental ill patients, they had weakened immune systems. Obviously, they had no ability to agree to participate or to withdraw. Unknown to themselves and to their families, they were injected with live cancer cells. And the purpose of that was to see what would happen and so that they could learn more about cancer and immunity. San Antonio in the 70s had a contraception clinic that decided to do a randomized double-blind study on contraceptive pills. Now, if it's randomized and double-blind, that means they just randomly pick some people to be in the experimental group and some to be in the control group. But the participants were never told they were participating in research, so they assumed they were getting birth control pills, and so there were a lot of unwanted pregnancies that happened because of that. Another really outrageous thing that happened was the Tuskegee syphilis study. This was a study that used mainly African American men who were mostly sharecroppers from Tuskegee, Alabama. And they were used because they were a convenient sample. They were there, and they weren't really told exactly what was going on, and so they thought they were getting free medical care, so they came. But what they were doing was just basically studying the effect of syphilis, what that did to people over the years. When the study began in 1932, there wasn't any known treatment for syphilis, so it was not considered unethical. However, with the advent of penicillin in the 1940s, there was treatment for syphilis, but that treatment was withheld so that they could continue to study what would happen to patients who did not get treatment. So in other words, they were doing a double-blind experiment, but it was not random, and the patients didn't know they were participating. So they deliberately kept a control group without them being aware that they were a control group. So most of the men thought they were getting medical treatment, and this was stopped in 1972 due to mass outrage. And because this was federal funded, this caused a huge time of mistrust of the federal government, of the healthcare system, and it caused just terrible outcomes for participants and their families. If syphilis is untreated, then patients can have devastating effects such as severe mental problems. So in the wake of the Tuskegee situation, there was a move to create a National Research Act, and also a national commission was formed to look at research, to look at how to protect humans from research and also from behavioral research. So the commission came together and they established our modern IRB system, the Institutional Review Board. And the Institutional Review Board is a board that will review human research to make sure it is ethical. And college campuses all across the country who participate in research have an IRB board, or they may call it something different, but it is an institutional review board. So you cannot conduct any type of research in the name of a university without getting approval through the IRB. This is why in our course we are writing a research paper. We are researching and looking at actual research studies. We are not conducting experiments in this program because there is not enough time to go through the IRB process within our 7-week period. So again, this established the Office for Human Research Protections, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And if you want to know more about the policies and regulations, you can click on this link and it will take you there and gives you all kinds of information about IRB, how to document informed consent, what the requirements are. Here is the criteria for IRB approval and IRB membership, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of information there for you if you're interested in conducting research and want to know more about that. So the ethical principles that were founded by this group are that there has to be a respect of persons. People have to voluntarily consent. They can't be coerced. They can't be tricked into participating. They have to have a full informed consent. Their privacy and confidentiality have to be protected. This is why when you collect evidence, you have to let people know what you're collecting and how you're collecting it and what you're going to do with it. And participants have the right to withdraw at any time without any type of penalty or repercussions to them. And because we use the principles of benevolence, this requires that research has to maximize benefit and minimize harm. So the risk to the person and the benefit to society that should come from the research has to be carefully considered, and it has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. So you can't decide that just because this risk is okay for these participants, it doesn't mean that the risk is okay for everyone. So you have to look at that one by one through your subjects. You also have to look at the distribution of risk across society. That means that people that are participating have to come from the pool of people who will benefit. You can't just use a group that's convenient to the researchers or easy to get, such as in the Tuskegee syphilis study. You have to use people that will benefit. So the basic human rights that are always protected in research are personal dignity, autonomy, protection from harm, informed consent, the right to withdraw, justice, which is equal distribution of risk and benefit. Unfortunately, there are some people that do not conduct themselves in an ethical manner, and these are the most common types of misconduct that have been documented. If there is fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, or deception, basically if you lie about how you carried out the research, or you lie in reporting research, if you misrepresent what happened, that's considered fraud or misconduct. Deliberate, negligent, or dangerous deviations, you have to carry out the research the way that you say that you're going to. And the way that you conduct the research has to be something that is normal practice. Failure to establish followed protocols if that failure resulted in harm to someone or to the environment. Facilitating misconduct by collusion or concealment of such actions by others. Intentional authorized use, disclosure, removal, or damage to research-related property of another. And that can include even the results and the write-ups of research. Sometimes research can be funded by external sources, which is really great because a lot of research would not get done without it. We do need funding and assistance in carrying it out. However, we have to be careful as researchers that we don't allow the special interest of those funding it to influence the result. So we have to stay true to what we're doing. The scary thing is that 40% of researchers report that they have seen misconduct or they know about it, but they don't report it. Be sure if you see something like that, if you begin to participate more in research, always be aware of that, looking for that, and be sure to report that because someone's life may depend on that. And then if you want to know more about getting information about how to protect human research participants, there is a National Institutes of Health has a certificate program. You can do this little program and get a certificate. And a lot of universities will require that you take this training before your particular research is approved. So you might want to save that link because that's something that you may need to use. Okay, this was very quick about and basic about research, about ethical research, and I hope you found that helpful.